The young and the restless. There are moments when betrayal does not come from enemies, but from the people who once knew you best. Moments when love mutates into judgment and ambition disguises itself as righteousness, and Lily's return to Genoa City ignites exactly that kind of storm. A storm not built on simple misunderstandings, but on choices so deliberate, so calculated that forgiveness may no longer be possible. Her disappearance had already fractured the emotional stability of everyone connected to her. Devon had been left pacing between logic and fear, refusing to accept that Lily would simply vanish without reason, while others whispered possibilities that grew darker with every passing day. Cain, however, carried a different burden. His concern was not pure. It was layered with guilt, with secrets, with the knowledge that his own double life, as Aristotle Dumas, had already created a web of deception so complex that Lily's disappearance felt less like a coincidence and more like a consequence. And that suspicion, even before the truth surfaced, began to poison the way he processed her absence. I think she looks fine also. Having freckles and being a natural redhead isn't necessarily the reason someone's chest is red. My family is part Irish, and some of my family are natural redheads with the pale white skin and full of freckles, but don't have red chests. Nobody wants to see those old saggy boobs any longer. She looks desperate. Sally and Audra are the young hot ladies, and they're covered more than Phyllis. I think she looks phenomenal, and it's kind of gross that you are even commenting. Invalidates your entire first line, as you are being mean and needlessly so. You should be ashamed. 90% of the time, I do not care for the choice of costumes the stylists choose for her. However, some fans agree with the long-standing look, just not my taste for a woman of her age and stature. When Lily finally returns, the relief is immediate but short-lived, replaced almost instantly by tension, by accusation, by the kind of emotional backlash that only comes when fear has been left to fester for too long. She does not receive the embrace she may have expected. Instead, she is met with scrutiny, with disbelief, with anger that feels justified and yet deeply unfair at the same time. Because while her actions demand explanation, the emotional intensity directed at her reveals just how fragile the bonds between them had already become. And then the truth emerges. Lily did not disappear helplessly. She orchestrated it. That revelation lands like a shockwave, not because it is impossible, but because it reframes everything. What was once seen as vulnerability becomes manipulation. What was once fear becomes calculation. And suddenly Lily is no longer the victim in this narrative. She is one of its architects. Her decision to stage her own kidnapping, to collaborate with Victor, is not impulsive. It is strategic, almost cold in its execution. She identifies what she wants control over Chancellor, a position of power that has been dangled in front of her for far too long, and she aligns herself with the one man who can make that happen regardless of the moral cost. From a storytelling perspective, this is a bold and fascinating shift. Lily, who has often been portrayed as someone navigating the chaos created by others, steps into a role where she becomes the creator of chaos herself. And that transformation is not clean or heroic. It is messy, controversial, deeply human. Her anger toward Cain becomes the emotional justification for her action. When Cain reveals himself as Aristotle Dumas, the businessman who has been operating in the shadows, building an empire under a false identity, Lily's reaction is immediate and explosive. She does not see sacrifice in his actions. She sees deception. She does not see ambition. She sees betrayal. And perhaps most importantly, she does not see love. She sees control. This is where the emotional conflict reaches its peak, because Cain's motivations are not entirely selfish. He genuinely believes that what he has done, building wealth, securing a future, was ultimately for his family. But intention does not erase impact. And for Lily, the impact is undeniable. She feels deceived, diminished, reduced to someone who is not worthy of the truth. From my perspective, this is where the narrative becomes especially compelling, because it refuses to simplify either side. Cain is not purely wrong. Lily is not purely right. They are both operating from wounded places, from perspectives shaped by past betrayals, unmet expectations, and deeply ingrained fears. But what makes Lily's response so controversial is not her anger, it is how she chooses to act on it. Instead of confronting Cain directly, instead of demanding accountability in a way that could lead to resolution, she escalates. She constructs a scenario designed to destabilize him, to force him into a position of vulnerability, to make him feel the same loss of control she experienced. And in doing so, she crosses a line that cannot be easily uncrossed. Her alliance with Victor is particularly significant. Victor does not offer help without expecting something in return. His involvement transforms Lily's plan from a personal act of retaliation into something much larger, something that carries implications far beyond her relationship with Cain. By agreeing to his terms, by accepting his support, Lily effectively places herself within his sphere of influence, a sphere that is known for manipulation, for strategic cruelty, for outcomes that rarely favor anyone but Victor himself. This decision raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. Is Lily truly in control of her plan, or is she being guided toward an outcome she cannot yet see? Because Victor's interest in her situation is unlikely to be purely altruistic. He sees potential in Lily, yes, but he also sees opportunity. And in a world where opportunity often comes at the expense of someone else, that is a dangerous combination. As the fallout unfolds, the reactions from those around Lily become increasingly intense. Devon's disappointment is particularly sharp because it is rooted in both love and expectation. He believed in Lily's integrity, in her ability to rise above the kind of manipulation that defines so many others in their world. And now he is forced to reconcile that belief with the reality of her actions. His anger is not loud, but it is deep-cutting, reflective of a bond that has been strained in a way that may not fully recover. Cain's response is more complicated. He is hurt, obviously, but beneath that hurt is something else, recognition. He sees in Lily's actions a mirror of his own behavior. The secrecy, the manipulation, the belief that the ends justify the means, it is all too familiar. And that realization creates a conflict within him that is difficult to navigate. Because if he condemns her, he must also confront himself. This is where the story becomes truly layered, because it is not just about who is right or wrong. It is about how easily people can become what they hate when pushed far enough. Lily, now facing the consequences of her choices, begins to experience the isolation that often accompanies power gained through questionable means. The support she may have expected is not there. The validation she sought feels hollow. And the position she fought so hard to obtain begins to feel less like a victory and more like a burden. From a personal standpoint, this is the most powerful aspect of her arc, because it demonstrates that success when achieved at the cost of trust does not feel like success at all. And yet she cannot simply step back, because stepping back would mean admitting that everything she did was a mistake. So she pushes forward even as the ground beneath her becomes increasingly unstable. Cain, meanwhile, is forced to decide how far he is willing to go to reclaim what has been lost, not just in terms of business, but in terms of relationship, identity, and self-respect. His path is no less dangerous than Lily's because it is driven by a similar mix of emotion and ambition. Victor watches all of this unfold with a level of detachment that is both impressive and unsettling. He understands that the most effective way to maintain control is not to dominate every move, but to influence the players in ways that lead them to make the choices he desires. And Lily, in her current state, becomes one of those players. The question is whether she will realize it before it is too late. Because in the end, the most dangerous traps are not the ones set by others. They are the ones we build for ourselves, convinced that we are the ones in control. There are moments in The Young and the Restless when the truth does not arrive as a revelation, but as a reckoning, when the line between victim and architect dissolves so completely that no one involved can escape the consequences, and what is unfolding around Lily Cain. Devon and Victor carries that exact brutal clarity, a story where moral authority collapses under the weight of hypocrisy, where love becomes indistinguishable from control, and where every character is forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that they may have become the very thing they once condemned. Lily's anger toward Cain had once felt justified, even necessary. From her perspective, Cain had abandoned not just their marriage, but the very idea of family itself, disappearing into a shadow identity, chasing power, wealth, and recognition under the name Aristotle Dumas, while leaving emotional devastation in his wake. She saw his choices not as sacrifice, but as betrayal, not as ambition, but as selfishness dressed up in purpose. And for months that narrative sustained her. It gave her clarity. It allowed her to define herself as the one who had been wronged, the one who had endured, the one who had remained grounded while he drifted into something darker. But what makes this storyline so devastating is how completely that certainty begins to unravel. Because when Lily chooses to align herself with Victor, when she agrees to participate in a staged kidnapping to teach Kane a lesson and secure control over Chancellor, she steps into a moral space that mirrors the very behavior she once condemned. And this is where the narrative becomes not just dramatic, but deeply ironic in a way that feels almost cruel. Lily, who accused Kane of abandoning family for power, begins to prioritize power over family herself. From a storytelling perspective, this is one of the most compelling reversals possible, because it forces the audience to question whether Lily's anger was ever purely about Kane's actions, or whether it was also about something deeper: resentment, frustration, a desire to reclaim control in a world where she has often felt sidelined. Her deal with Victor is not just strategic. It is emotional. It is reactive. It is driven by a need to prove that she can operate on the same level as the men who have shaped so much of her life. And yet the cost of that decision becomes immediately apparent. While Lily hides, while she negotiates, while she convinces herself that she is in control of the situation, her family is unraveling in real time. Devon's fear is not abstract. It is visceral, rooted in trauma that has never fully healed. The memory of Dominic's kidnapping lingers like a scar that never quite fades, and the possibility of losing Lily in the same way reopens that wound with brutal intensity. Devon's desperation is not loud at first. It is controlled, focused, driven by the need to act rather than collapse. But beneath that control is a rising panic that he cannot fully suppress. He searches, questions, pushes, refusing to accept uncertainty as an answer. And the more he fails to find clarity, the more that panic transforms into anger, anger at whoever is responsible, anger at the situation, and eventually anger at Lily herself when the truth begins to surface. Nate, standing alongside him, represents a different kind of tension. He is analytical, measured, attempting to bring logic into a situation that feels anything but logical. But even he cannot ignore the emotional weight pressing down on all of them. The absence of Lily is not just a missing piece. It is a destabilizing force that affects every decision, every interaction, every assumption. Meanwhile, Kane operates in a space that is both tragic and revealing. When he believes Lily has been taken, his response is immediate and unfiltered. He does not hesitate. He does not negotiate with himself. He is willing to give in to Victor's demands, to sacrifice, leverage, power, anything necessary to ensure her safety. And in that willingness, there is a kind of redemption, a glimpse of the man Lily once believed he could be. But that redemption is built on a lie, and that is what makes it so painful. Because Kane is not responding to reality. He is responding to a version of events that has been constructed to manipulate him. And when he discovers the truth, that Lily was not a victim, that she was a participant, that she chose this path willingly, the emotional impact is devastating. It is not just betrayal. It is humiliation. It is the realization that his willingness to sacrifice his attempt to prove his love was never even necessary. From my perspective, this is where Kane's storyline reaches its most powerful point, because he is forced to confront a contradiction that cannot be easily resolved. He was wrong to abandon his family in the way he did. He was wrong to hide behind an identity that created distance and distrust. But Lily's actions do not erase his mistakes. They mirror them. And that mirroring creates a tension that is both symmetrical and deeply unfair. Who, in this situation, has the moral high ground? The answer is not clear, and that ambiguity is what gives the story its depth. As the truth comes out, as the staged kidnapping is exposed, Lily is forced to return not as someone who has reclaimed power, but as someone who must now face the consequences of how that power was obtained. The reactions she encounters are not what she anticipated. There is no admiration, no validation, no sense that her actions were justified. Instead, there is disappointment. There is anger. There is a kind of quiet, heavy disillusionment that feels far more damaging than open hostility. Devon's response is particularly cutting because it is rooted in a loss of trust that goes beyond the immediate situation. He does not just see Lily as someone who made a bad decision. He sees her as someone who allowed herself to become part of a system that thrives on manipulation and emotional damage. And for someone who has always valued family as a grounding force, that realization is almost unbearable. Kane's reaction is less explosive, but no less intense. He does not lash out in the way one might expect. Instead, he withdraws, processes, internalizes, and that restraint makes his pain feel even more profound. Because it suggests that he is not just reacting to the situation, he is reevaluating everything. His relationship with Lily, his own choices, the path that led them both here. Victor, of course, remains a constant presence throughout all of this, though his role is never fully transparent. He does not need to justify his involvement. He does not need to explain his motives. For him, the situation is a demonstration of influence, of the ability to shape outcomes without direct confrontation. And Lily, whether she realizes it or not, becomes a reflection of that influence. This raises a critical question that lingers over the entire storyline. Did Lily use Victor, or did Victor use Lily? Because the answer to that question determines not just how this situation is resolved, but how Lily will be perceived moving forward. As the emotional fallout continues to spread, Lily finds herself in a position that feels increasingly isolated. The power she sought does not bring satisfaction. The control she believed she had begins to feel fragile. And the relationships she took for granted are no longer secure. From a broader perspective, this is where the story delivers its most important message. That power gained through manipulation is inherently unstable. That revenge, even when justified, rarely leads to the closure one expects. And that the most difficult consequences are not the ones imposed by others, but the ones we impose on ourselves when we cross lines we once swore we would never approach. Lily now stands at a crossroads, but unlike before, there are no clear options. She can attempt to repair the damage, but trust once broken at this level is not easily restored. She can double down on her choices, embracing the power she has gained, but that path leads further into isolation. Or she can step away, entirely relinquishing what she fought for in order to reclaim something more personal, more meaningful. None of these choices are easy. None of them are clean. And that is exactly what makes this moment so compelling. Because in the end, the most important battle is not between Lily and Kane, or Lily and Devon, or even Lily and Victor. It is within Lily herself. And whether she can face the person she has become,